Americans for Prosperity North Dakota proudly supported important policy improvements that broke barriers for all North Dakotans this legislative session. From tackling unnecessary and burdensome occupational licensing standards to fighting for tax relief, AFP is proud to have played a part in improving the lives of North Dakotans this year. Join AFP today by visiting www.afpnd.org. This advertisement was paid for by Americans for Prosperity. Welcome to the Plain Talk Podcast. I am your host, Rob Port. Later in the show, we're going to be talking with Congressman Kelly Armstrong, who answers your questions, including questions about that, well, I'm going to call it a stunt that comedian actor Jon Stewart pulled at a House Judiciary Subcommittee meeting this week. I'm sure you've probably seen it on the news. Stewart gets very emotional, very angry. He's pointing out that most of the chairs in that chamber are empty. And I got to tell you, I thought the whole thing was stupid. The whole thing was a stunt. And here's why. Not because I don't think Jon Stewart's, feelings about the 9/11 first responders and everything that they've gone through since the situation with, since 9/11, obviously. It's not that I think he's heartfelt. It's just that I think he was grandstanding. Here's reality behind that chamber. First of all, there were a lot of empty seats in that chamber. Remember, this was a subcommittee hearing being held in a full committee room. Even if every single member of the subcommittee had been in the room the entire time, well, there were going to be a lot of a lot of empty chairs in that room regardless. So, Stewart's getting angry over something he really didn't need to get angry about. Also, by the way, he had already won the argument. Later that day, the legislation passed the Judiciary Subcommittee unanimously, and you'll hear Congressman Armstrong tell me later on in the show that as soon as that bill hits the House floor, it's going to pass by a wide margin. It's not really in doubt that this legislation is going to pass. So what is he shouting about? A lot of those members of committee, they had conflicting committee hearings. Congressman Armstrong, for instance, told me that he had an oversight committee meeting at the same time, as well as a meeting with a deputy attorney general about federal land use. Now, the oversight committee is an important committee. Obviously, it's in the news constantly with the investigations of President Trump and all of that sort of thing. And federal land use is an issue hugely important to the state of North Dakota. So what does Congressman Armstrong to do? Well, he said he spent about an hour or so in the hearing room for Mr. Stewart's hearing, for the hearing on this legislation. But he had these other things to attend to. Where is he going to spend his time? Should he go to the Oversight Committee? Should he meet with the Attorney General? Or should he spend the entire day sitting in a committee room to listen to testimony on a bill that A, isn't particularly controversial, and B, he's already made up his mind to vote for? I have never liked Jon Stewart. I think he's a very talented person. I've enjoyed some of his performances, but what he's done in American politics, I think is wrong. Whether we want to talk about, the Daily Show and its sort of pioneering move into politics as entertainment, to this stunt he pulled this week. I don't think Jon Stewart is a serious man. I think Jon Stewart has an enormous ego. I think he does things in service of that ego. I think he sort of likes, taking this outsider, whatever approach, right? That's what he did as a satirist. That's what he does as even now with his advocacy. And I think it's ridiculous. I think it's hurtful. I think his approach to it isn't helpful. I think in American politics right now, the last thing we need are performers like Jon Stewart. This was a performance. I don't think we need more serious people in politics and fewer people like Jon Stewart. Anyway, I wrote a post about it at sayanythingblog.com if you want to check that out. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we get to Congressman Armstrong taking your questions is Wallet Hub. Now, and maybe you've heard of this, and not just companies like Wallet Hub, but companies like Wallet Hub, NerdWallet, Insurify, and there's others out there. They have a marketing strategy, and the marketing strategy is essentially this. I think I've talked about it on the podcast before. I've certainly written about it. In fact, I wrote my print column about this issue this week. But Wallet Hub and NerdWallet, et cetera, they have a strategy where they do, they produce reports or studies, and I'm doing air quotes with my fingers here, because these are very shallow analyses of data to determine things like which state is the drunkest, which state, is this, which state is that. The most recent one I wrote about is which state is the most fun and which state is the least fun. Now, North Dakota came in number 40 on the list of fun states. And I was looking at some of the criteria. I mean, the whole thing is a little silly. I mean, they're measuring things like, workout centers per capita and et cetera, et cetera. And because of all of their, these subjective criteria that they put in place, North Dakota is ranked as not fun. And I'll admit that the report tweaked me a little bit. And I should explain, this is a marketing strategy because what happens is Wallet Hub, et cetera, they produce these reports and then they pitch them to reporters in press releases. I get the press releases all the time. And then reporters who are always thirsty for content, right? They've always got space to fill. They run articles on them. And those articles mention the companies that produce the reports. And sometimes they even link to the company's websites. And that helps those companies with their search engine ranking and their marketing and everything else. So you're essentially driving traffic to Wallet Hub. And what is Wallet Hub's business model? Well, it's not ranking states on random criteria. Wallet Hub's business is essentially selling you financial services, primarily credit cards. Insurify, that's another company does it. They sell you insurance policies. These are just companies, and what they're trying to do is they're trying to produce what they think of as journalism, or what they think of as scientific analysis or studies or what have you. But it's really just a thin veneer over a marketing strategy. That's what's going on. And it tweaked me because calling North Dakota not fun is hurtful to our state. And I'm not just talking it hurts our pride or whatever. North Dakota has a serious problem with a labor shortage. We have a chronic labor shortage. Our unemployment rate is too low. And I know that seems weird to say that the unemployment rate is too low, but think about it. If you're thinking about starting a new industry or investing in a new company in North Dakota, what's one of the things to look at is, are there people there who are going to be able to fill the jobs that you're going to create? Is there an available labor pool? Well, in North Dakota, there's not. Our unemployment rate, even when, during the recent tough economic sledding we had where commodity prices were low, oil prices were low, and, North Dakota had, a lot of economic problems not so long ago, even during that time, the unemployment rate was low. I think the most recent number is like 2.3%. I mean, that's beyond full employment. That's a labor shortage is what that is. It's not a good thing. Now, one way we overcome that is we attract people to come and live in our state. Right? We want people to move here. We want them to live here. We want them to take jobs in our communities. We want them to invest in our communities. We want them to enrich our communities with their culture and their commerce. Those would all be great things. But it's hard to do that if what's being perpetuated out there is this idea that North Dakota is boring, or that North Dakota is drunk, or that North Dakota, there aren't a lot of fun things to do in North Dakota, right? That's the perception of our state, that we're just this desolate frozen tundra, or tundra that's frozen most of the time when it's not baking during the summer. And yeah, there's not a lot we can do about the weather, but I mean, this has been going on for a long time. Eric Severide, who's from Velva, North Dakota, right? He was born here before going on to a very famous broadcasting career, sort of famously said that North Dakota is a blank spot on the nation's imagination. Or something like that. I'm paraphrasing. That's hurtful. I mean, that's a perception we have to overcome if we want our state to prosper, if we want our state to grow and prosper. We have to overcome that. So Wallet Hub producing a quote-unquote report like this that is, so shallow in its analysis and is not even really about informing the public, but rather about raising the status of Wallet Hub so that they could sell more credit cards. Well, I'll tell you, it irked me. I'm not, if there are negative news stories in the state of North Dakota, those need to be reported. I'm not against that. I am, however, against silly headlines based on shallow analysis that mean exactly nothing. Because sometimes people take them seriously. I remember not so long ago, Wallet Hub did a ranking of the best managed states, the best governed states. And Governor Jack Dalrymple, at the time, I think this was circa maybe like 2012, somewhere in there, was touting this all over the place. Right? North Dakota, the best run state in the country. It was part of his re-election campaign. I think he even mentioned it in his State of the State address. It's a big deal he made out of it. right? Because obviously if you're the governor of a state that some quote unquote study is saying is the best run in the nation, well, that's a good talking point, isn't it? Except how well run were we? Look what happened to the budget after Governor Dalrymple left office. Were we really being managed that well, or were we just succeeding from the oil boom? Well, Wallet Hub said we were the best run state in the nation based on their criteria. It was ridiculous. So they produce these reports and they get reported on in the news media, and people treat them like these are real, very rigorous, sort of scientific studies, and they're not. So I wrote a column about it, and I said, North Dakota's fun, despite what some dumb study says. And I actually got a response from Wallet Hub. A woman by the name of Diana Polk emailed me. Her job title is Communications Manager for Wallet Hub. She's based out of Washington, D.C., and she wrote, I quote, "Hi, Rob. I hope all is well. I just read the article where you mentioned our study. I want to stress the fact that our reports are very well documented and the analysis is always unbiased. We publish this type of studies." That's what she wrote. "We publish this type of studies with the sole purpose of informing and educating our readers on various topics. Wallet Hub is dedicated to helping people stay on top of their finances and improving their overall quality of life. We are able to do this by providing financial advice, but also through our reports. We ask that you edit your article to include these details." Now, not only did I not edit my article, because I don't feel like I need to edit my article to make Wallet Hub feel better about themselves, but also I wrote a blog post at sayanythingblog.com about this email because for one thing, I didn't accuse them of bias. I don't think Wallet Hub has it out for North Dakota. I don't think there's some anti-North Dakota animus in Wallet Hub's corporate ranks. I just think that their listicle, their list, their rankings, their data that they put out, I just think they're stupid. I don't think they're particularly useful, and I don't think they should be reported on as news. That's my point. And I think Wallet Hub ought to find a better way to sign people up for Visa cards. So the next time you see a headline out there that's about, this state is the drunkest or this state has the most whatever, look at who's producing the data. And if it's a company that's in the business of, selling insurance policies or credit cards or loans or something like that, maybe don't take it very seriously. My interview with Congressman Kevin Cramer up next. This episode of the Plain Talk Podcast is brought to you by Energy of North Dakota. Oil and natural gas from North Dakota strengthens all of America. And through our abundance of talents, innovations, and technologies, energy responsibly produced here translates to worldwide economic stability. With producers and our communities working together, we're securing a sustainable future that generation after generation can build on. It's all happening right now with Energy of North Dakota. Learn more at energyofnorthdakota.com. Congressman Kelly Armstrong joins me now as he does every week. Kelly, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Rob.
You were on the floor of that. What's going on the floor of the House today? I know you were a little busy. We were working on the interview, and it's always something going on. But what are you up to today?
Yeah, we have 75 amendments to appropriations bills, and Representative Shiproy from Texas demanded a roll call vote on all of them. So going into late last night and the rest of the day, there were roll call votes on all the amendments to the bill, which is, it's not the best way to do business. A lot of these things are great ideas. I supported a lot of the amendments. I think at the end of the day, the increase in spending, the decrease in military funding means after you vote for all of these things, I'm going to end up voting against the actual appropriations bills. So it's not the best way to do business. I wish a whole lot of these things were independent bills because that would be, in my opinion, a better way to govern, but not quite how it gets done down here.
Well, sometimes you just got to go with what's possible as opposed to what we actually want. Now, I want to get right into it because we have a question about something that I was going to ask about anyway. But a listener asked something that made a lot of headlines. Dave via Twitter asks, "Now I may be incorrect as I can't find the attendance list on the House website, but from videos I've seen, Representative Armstrong was a no-show for a recent subcommittee hearing on the 9/11 Victim Compensation Fund. Why? Where was he?" Now, this is something that made a lot of headlines because Jon Stewart, comedian, former host of The Daily Show, obvious celebrity, was there, and it kind of read read your committee the riot act, because at least on the clip that's been played a lot on the news, there were a lot of empty chairs in that room while he was talking. And, you know, his accusation was that the members of the committee didn't care. They weren't there to listen. First of all, were you there? Were you in the room? Did you attend any part of that committee hearing? And why so many empty chairs?
Yeah, I was there for the first hour, and then I actually had to go to a meeting that we've had on the books for 2 weeks with Senator Kramer, Senator Hoeven, and the Deputy Attorney General. And I mean, that is on a federal lands issue that's really important in North Dakota. And I think one thing to be pointed out, that was in the full committee room, and it was a subcommittee hearing. So there were going to be a lot of empty chairs either way. But I stayed as long as I could, and then I went to another meeting. And just to give you an example, because I think this is important, there's a lot of things to criticize us for, and I don't doubt that at all. But yesterday I had full committee and oversight and full committee and judiciary at the exact same time. This morning we had briefing in judiciary and the environment or the select committee on climate crisis at the same time. I mean, we have to bounce back and forth and go from one committee to another, from one meeting to another, and that's just simply what happened.
Where are you at on the issue of that, on the 9/11 Victims Compensation Fund? I mean, where are you at on that bill anyway?
Yeah, it passed unanimously yesterday out of judiciary, and I expect it'll pass with, I mean, I don't know how many no votes, but not very many on the floor of the House next week. So, do
you think there was some grandstanding then? I mean, because that was kind of I mean, obviously, I feel I can understand why it's an emotional issue. And I don't begrudge anybody getting emotional over an issue like that. But I'm looking there and I'm thinking, I don't know that there was a lot of controversy about this bill. Like you said, it passed out of the committee unanimously. Obviously, you were a yes vote for it. You didn't need to be persuaded at that point. You're already on their side. At that point, you know, what other than I guess symbolism, what's the point of being in the room? Do you think Jon Stewart was grandstanding a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know. I can't impugn to his motives. I think it fits into a lot of things about what happens, but I will say anytime we're calling attention to more and more people, I mean, we're just learning more and more every day about how different people are getting sick from what happened there. And the fund is running out of money. And one of the reasons is because so many more people are having so many different problems related to that. So now it's essentially going to be fully funded through 2090, and we're adequately funding it because it needs to be done. And you know, it is a national issue. It's not it's something we should never forget. So I mean, I'll leave it to other people to decide how and why it occurred that way, but the bill's going to pass on the floor of the House, and it's going to pass very big.
Let's move on and talk about the Justice Reinvestment Initiative Act. I know that's something that you introduced this week. What is it? What does it mean for North Dakota?
Yeah, it's essentially a federal grant program to work on recidivism rates and deal with the criminal justice reform, but it's grant programs that get to local city, county, state, tribal governments, because that's the only way you can really do this. This is not a problem you can solve from DC. This has to be addressed at the local level. And we're lucky because there's a lot of states that have implemented this. National or Council of State Governments has been involved in this. So if you're a rural district in Kansas who has never done this before, there will be data and information from whether it's rural Texas or rural North Dakota to help you do this. So it's a grant program. It's a flexible grant program. So so you can provide the services with what you have, not what you wish you had. But there's also accountability built into it. So we make sure that the money's being spent appropriately.
So basically, this is money, right? I mean, this is the federal government giving money to local law enforcement to help address this.
Law enforcement, correction officers, various different groups, to allow them to implement programs that, help reduce crime rates and reduce recidivism.
Right. And so that's, I guess that's the important thing, is it's not just about, at this point, just arresting more people, right? I mean, when we're talking about reducing recidivism, that means, okay, you've done something wrong, you've broken some laws, you know, there's probably conviction, there's some sentencing along that, but also let's look at getting you in a position to where, now that you've paid your debt to society, quote unquote, as we say all the time, that you're going to re-enter society and not do it again, because hopefully you're going to find happiness and prosperity and just be a part of our society that doesn't break the law.
Yeah, and I mean, we have local programs. You can look at the F5 project, which is becoming huge in North Dakota, which is, better housing for people as they're coming back into society. One of the things that we've learned over the years is if you do halfway houses in these areas where you congregate a bunch of, criminals coming or people coming out of prison, particularly with addiction-related crimes, that is not the best scenario for everybody. Because, I mean, no matter how good all your programs are, if you put 75 recovering addicts together in the same area, the chances of one of them relapsing is significant, and you can drag everybody else into it. So we're smarter about how we do this, about how we re-enter them into the workforce. Because if you have housing and gainful employment, your likelihood of recidivism goes down so much. And then you're breaking that generational cycle of addiction and crime, which the return on investment in that for taxpayers is fantastic. And that's before you get into the fact that it's actually helping save lives and save families and get people back on being productive members of society and not just better criminals.
I don't think people realize how complicated this is. I just wrote this week, I don't know if you caught it or not, but I think the policy probably started during your time in the state legislature. But essentially it's a mandate from the legislature that people convicted of charged, not yet convicted, but out on bail, that they have to undergo drug testing while out on bail. Now, I've been hearing from criminal defense attorneys around the state that this is creating a lot of problems because they have people, again, not yet convicted, but as part of their bail condition, they have to go to this drug testing, but sometimes they can't afford the drug testing. There was a situation up here in Minot where an individual who is not suspected of using drugs at all says, I can't, it's like $300 a month for me to do this. And I'm obviously in the middle of a criminal proceeding. I'm not making, I'm basically working minimum wage. I can't afford $300 a month. But if I can't, that means that the drug testing company is reporting him back as failing these drug tests to the court. And the court is kind of left with no position but to put the guy back in jail. So we have somebody who could be out of jail, saving the taxpayers money that way, but now we're putting him in jail because he can't afford the mandated drug test. I spoke with another attorney who was on the podcast earlier this week, Mark Fries from the Vogel Law Firm in Fargo, who was telling me that he's had clients who were literally in a program, but once you go into some of these drug programs, you're not allowed back out of it. So he's in the program, but couldn't get out of the program to go do his mandatory drug testing. So even though he was in rehab and not taking drugs and being monitored, because he couldn't go to this court mandated, he had to go back to jail. That seems ludicrous. So this is so complicated. And sometimes well-meaning policy gets in the way. So I have to think a lot of this is just sort of unwinding how this works, right? I think it's complicated, more complicated than a lot of people realize.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things we can do in North Dakota, and this is something we have in some jurisdictions that I wish was everywhere, would be drug courts in every jurisdiction. But the other answer is when you're talking about release, we're going through 2011, 2012, anywhere between 70 and 95% of our county jails were full of people on pretrial detention. So I agree with that, especially for court-appointed clients. If they're indigent, this can never be a situation where only poor people are locked up pending trial and everybody else isn't. But also, we want to do the least restrictive means to keep everybody out on bond, provided they're going to appear at their court hearings and they're not a danger to society. So it is complicated. It is. It's hard to deal with, and every time you're trying to solve a problem of over incarceration pending trial. So what you do is you add drug testing and allow for those types of things so they can get out. But now you have the fee issue. And not only are there serious practical implications, there's some constitutional questions that come up in some of these things as well.
Let's move on and talk. This week, you and the other two members of our federal delegation, Senator John Hoeven, Senator Kevin Cramer, urged the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense to assist in the Dakota Access Pipeline, Department of Defense, because we're talking about the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, to assist in the DAPL settlement case. Where are we on this? Is North Dakota ever going to get any reimbursement from the state over? And when we say, for those of you who aren't up to speed on this, essentially there was a huge law enforcement cost incurred by, it was almost $40 million incurred by the state of North Dakota because of the protests against the Dakota Access Pipeline. There's a federal nexus here because essentially under the Obama administration, protesters were allowed to illegally camp on federal land. The federal government didn't intervene to help stop, law breaking. That created jurisdictional nightmares for our law enforcement on the ground. And so the state of North Dakota's position is, hey, feds, reimburse us. Where are we at? Are we ever going to see any money from the federal government?
I don't know, but we're going to keep pushing it because their lack of action cost the state of North Dakota and taxpayers in North Dakota a lot of money. And I don't think you have to look very far to tell, because the minute the administration changed and the law was enforced, all of a sudden the protest was over pretty quickly. So their failure to enforce federal law, and here's where it's frustrating for North Dakotans. And this is so if you have a cabin or something on Lake Sakakawea and you drive your four-wheeler across, literally you drive your four-wheeler across Cortland, they will send you a ticket and come down on you. But let alone having, tens of thousands of environmental activists from California camping out there, we don't seem to have an opinion that we should do anything.
We had a cabin on Lake Audubon that was surrounded by Corps land, and we were doing some work on the driveway, and like the edge of one of our piles of dirt was a little bit on Corps property, and within 24 hours, they were all over us. We didn't get a ticket or anything. We just had to move the dirt, but they were on us. And yet, you're right. You look at, and the protesters were allowed to camp and drive vehicles and start fires and do everything else on federal land, and the Obama administration just looked the other way.
Yeah, and so their failure to enforce it now. Selective enforcement is typically not the world's greatest defense, but I am on full board with Senator Hoeven, Senator Craver, Attorney General Senjum, Governor Burgum, and we're going to continue to put pressure on them.
Why? I think a lot of people are wondering why. We have President Trump in office. President Trump obviously had a much different view on the Dakota Access Pipeline and the protesters than President Obama did. I think a lot of people are wondering why, with the Trump administration in place, why is this still so hard? Why is this such a heavy lift?
Well, and some of it is because of how the inner workings of the bureaucracy work and how those are. I think, and we've seen this with some rulemaking and rule authorities. It's not as simple as President Trump saying, yes, go write the check. I think if we had that I think if it was that simple, we would probably have, at least a quicker answer of getting an answer quickly.
You were on Meet the Press Daily just recently on MSNBC talking about obstruction and the Mueller report and impeachment and all of that stuff, and obviously in front of a national audience there. What was your message? At that point, I'm reading some of the quotes here, and basically you're saying, hey, let's move on. Let's talk about policy. Democrats are saying, no, we have somebody who's I guess in their mind is breaking the law or is potentially breaking the law. How do we bridge this gap, or is this just going to be how it is till the end of the Trump administration?
Well, first, I was glad they asked me to be on, but I think one of the reasons they probably asked me to be on is all their regular contributors were testifying in front of our committee, so they were probably hurting a little bit for witnesses. And I'm serious. Outside of all of everything else, when you have 3 cable news contributors in there that have no bearing on the facts of what happened in the Mueller report at all, it's frustrating. It's frustrating to have to be a part of that and move through it. And I think the answer is, and quite frankly, we're not in charge of this. They either need to start the impeachment proceeding or they need to move on. Because the title of the hearing was presidential obstruction and other crimes. It's an impeachment hearing, but they're not having an impeachment hearing. So I think that's what the frustration is. It's politically motivated. They're moving their way through it, and at the same time, it is bleeding into everything else. We need to get USMCA passed. We need to solve. We deal with immigration issues. I'm on the immigration subcommittee. I just had a group in here talking about H-2A visas. There are a lot of other things we could be working on instead of having a hearing where they're bringing in cable news, people with cable news contracts to opine in front of the committee. I don't know why we had to have the hearing. All you got to do is turn the TV on at night. You could have heard every one of these witnesses speak.
I think it's just modern politics, and we don't. Maybe it's not even modern politics. You could go all the way back to 2000 and the recount with in Florida and the Bush v. Gore situation, and then you have even going back further, I guess, the impeachment of Bill Clinton. There just seems to be an unwillingness to accept election results. right? Like one party wins, and as painful as it is sometimes, I mean, I haven't necessarily liked sometimes watching people that I don't like very much get to govern. It's hard because I think a lot of the decisions they make are the wrong decisions. But there just seems to be an unwillingness. There's an appetite, and it's not just the politicians. I think there's an appetite in the electorate to just not let the other side govern. Republicans seem to want to do it when Democrats are in power, and now that Republicans are in power, Democrats don't want to let Republicans govern. To me, that's just what it is. It's just whatever we could throw out, and who's good at filling a room with a lot of hot air than a political pundit. And I say that as a political pundit myself. I mean, we can go on and on and on and be a big distraction and throw a lot of bombs. But it's just, I mean, at some point, it's just Trump won the election. He's going to govern for a while. If you don't like him, work on winning the next election.
Yeah, I mean, and you and I have talked about that, whether it's Ilhan Omar in Minneapolis or anything. I think we get too involved in impeachment and all of this. Go win. Go win the war of ideas. I mean, if they want to beat President Trump, they have an opportunity to do it the second Tuesday in November of 2020.
What do you think? Last question. The situation in Iran is unfolding. We have, and I'm just seeing. I don't know what you've seen, but I'm just seeing some breaking news alerts about the potential that it was Iran behind some attacks on some oil ships. What do you think of that situation as it's unfolding? I realize it's early days and it's just now unfolding, but what are you seeing?
Yeah, I mean, I think to anybody who doesn't think that Iran is, probably the largest state sponsor of terrorism and has anti-American intent. And again, you can't decouple many of those groups from the Iranian government. Obviously, President Trump named the Iranian National Guard as a terrorist organization. And I mean, it's just to continue to, the single best thing we can do is continue to develop our oil and natural gas so we get into a situation where our economy doesn't depend on these countries at all. It's really, really dangerous. And I'm not talking about North Dakota economics because this truly is a national security issue, as we continue to move forward with this. I mean, we've got Saudi Arabia. I mean, we've got issues with Saudi Arabia. We've got issues with Turkey, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination that we should not understand that Iran, either through proxy or other areas, is working to do the United States harm.
It's interesting. Well, and this is actually the last question now, but I wanted to get this in. We had President Trump threaten trade tariffs with Mexico, then said that he cut a deal with Mexico. Democrats are saying he didn't really cut a deal. There was nothing there all along, and you have that whole kerfuffle. And I'm not really that interested in talking about all of that. What I want is a good working relationship with Mexico on trade and immigration. I think if we could accomplish that, that would be a wonderful, wonderful thing. What's interesting to me is that while Democrats talk about that and they talk about, trade tariffs with Mexico, and increasingly Democrats say they're coming around on free trade, I think mostly just because Trump is using tariffs as a tool right now. So all of a sudden Democrats who for years and years, took sort of I don't know if you remember Byron Dorgan in North Dakota, during the years he was our United States Senator, didn't sound all that different than President Trump did when it came to trade issues. So I don't know. It's a little weird to watch this reshuffling, but as all of this is going on, the USMCA continues to languish in the House chamber, and I'm just wondering if Democrats mean what they say about all this stuff with trade. Where are we at on that? Are we ever going to get a vote in the House on that trade deal?
That is absolutely a question for Democratic leadership, because if it was on the floor tomorrow, it would pass. And the only way, we need to continue to put pressure on moderate and vulnerable Democrats to force Democratic leadership to put it on the floor. So in just everything you went through regarding trade, tariffs, all of those issues, the single biggest thing we can do for those relationships is to pass USMCA. It has the added benefit of being really good for the North Dakota economy. So we need to get it on the floor. Nancy Pelosi needs to put it on the floor, and we need to vote it out.
Kelly, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Rob.
That's it for today's podcast. Remember, new episodes come out most weekdays right away in the morning. Summer schedule, no new episodes on Mondays, but I will be uploading my radio segments with Jay Thomas, my good friend. He's host on WDAY AM 970 out of Fargo. If you want to give me any feedback on the show, you can certainly email me, rob@sayanythingblog.com. You can follow all new developments with the podcast, my columns, the blog. If you follow me on social media, I'm at Rob Port on Twitter. You can find me on Facebook and Say Anything blog on Facebook and Twitter. If you're listening to the podcast on a platform that allows you to rate it or review it, if you would leave an honest rating and review, I would really appreciate that. Every new rating or review goes a long way towards, tweaking those algorithms out there and helping other people who might want to listen find the podcast, which this podcast has a nice growing audience. I'm glad. I'm happy with the number of people who are tuning in. It's really a big deal. Also, if you want to send in questions for our weekly guest, Senator Kevin Cramer, Congressman Kelly Armstrong, you can do that, rob@sayanythingblog.com. Send those questions in any time, and I'll be sure to ask them the next time they're on. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again.